The wooden platform creaked beneath Hope's worn boots as rough hands shoved her forward into the blistering New Mexico sun. And she lifted her chin, despite the iron shackles cutting into her wrists, because she refused to let these men see her cry. The summer of 1877 had turned Abiquiu into a furnace, and the crowd gathered in the town square seemed just as merciless as the heat. Hope Richardson's threadbare dress clung to her skin, and dust coated her auburn hair, but she kept her green eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the gathering of men. She would not look at their faces. She would not see their judgment or their hunger or their cold calculation as they evaluated her worth like livestock at a county fair. "Gentlemen, we have here a healthy young woman, 20 years of age, capable of all manner of household duties," the auctioneer called out, his voice carrying across the square. "Indentured for a period of 5 years to cover her deceased father's debts. Who will start the bidding at $50? Hope's jaw clenched. Her father had been dead for 3 months, killed in a mining accident outside Santa Fe. She had learned only after his burial that he owed money to half the territory, borrowed to pay for her mother's medicine before consumption took her 2 years prior. The creditors had come like vultures, and when they found nothing of value to take, they took her instead. Indentured servitude, they called it. Slavery by another name, she thought bitterly. $50, a voice called from the crowd. Hope's gaze flickered to see a heavy-set rancher she recognized, a man known for working his hands harder than his horses. $60. Another voice countered. The bidding continued, climbing higher, and Hope felt her stomach twist with each new call. She tried to imagine herself somewhere else, anywhere else. She thought of the small cabin where she had grown up, of her mother's gentle hands braiding her hair, of her father's laughter before grief and debt had worn him down to nothing. $100, came a new voice, deeper than the others, cutting through the murmur of the crowd like a blade. Hope's eyes snapped to the source. A tall man stood near the back of the gathering, his broad shoulders blocking the sun for those around him. He wore dusty riding clothes and a dark hat pulled low, but she could see the sharp line of his jaw and the intensity in his expression. Something about him made her breath catch, though she could not say why. $110, the heavy-set rancher called, irritation creeping into his tone. $150, the tall man responded without hesitation. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. That was more than twice what most servants commanded, indentured or otherwise. The auctioneer's eyes gleamed with sudden interest. $150 going once, he called. The heavy-set rancher scowled but shook his head and stepped back. No one else spoke, going twice. The auctioneer paused, scanning the crowd. Sold to Garrett Pierce for $150. Hope's heart hammered against her ribs as the tall man moved forward through the crowd. He walked with a quiet confidence, and as he climbed the platform steps, she finally got a clear look at him. He was young, perhaps 25, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. A day's worth of stubble shadowed his face, and there was something both hard and gentle in his features, like a man who had seen too much but refused to let it break him. "Papers," Garrett Pierce said to the auctioneer, his voice low and even. The auctioneer handed over the indenture contract, and Garrett scanned it quickly before folding it and tucking it into his vest pocket. Then he pulled out a worn leather wallet and counted out the money with steady hands. Hope watched, trying to read his intentions in his movements, but his face revealed nothing. When the transaction was complete, Garrett turned to her. Their eyes met, and Hope felt something shift in her chest, a strange flutter she had no name for. He reached out and grasped the chain connecting her shackles, and she flinched despite herself. "Come on," he said quietly, not unkindly. He led her down the platform steps and through the dispersing crowd. Hope's mind raced. What kind of man was he? What would he expect from her? The questions tangled in her throat, but she could not voice them, not here, not with everyone watching. She stumbled slightly on the uneven ground and his hand shot out to steady her elbow, then released her just as quickly. They walked to the far side of the square where a gray mare stood tied to a hitching post. The horse was well-groomed and strong-looking, the kind of animal that cost real money. Garrett untied the reins and turned back to Hope, studying her for a long moment. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Yes," she managed, her voice hoarse from disuse. She had not spoken much in the days since her indenture had been finalized. He nodded and swung into the saddle with easy grace, then extended his hand down to her. "Up behind me." Hope hesitated, then placed her shackled hands in his. His grip was firm and warm, and he pulled her up behind him with surprising gentleness. She had barely settled onto the horse's back before he urged the mare into a walk. Hope grabbed at his shoulders for balance, acutely aware of his closeness, the solid feel of him beneath her hands. They rode through Abiquiu's dusty streets in silence. Hope watched the familiar buildings pass, wondering if she would ever see this town again. Her whole life had been lived within a few miles of this place, and now she was leaving with a stranger who owned her labor for the next 5 years. The thought made her throat tight. When they reached the edge of town, Garrett turned the mare onto a narrow trail that wound into the hills. The landscape here was stark and beautiful, all red rock and scrub brush beneath an endless sky. They rode for what felt like hours, the sun beating down relentlessly, and Hope's mouth grew parched. She wanted to ask where they were going, how far his ranch was, but pride kept her silent. Finally, when the sun was halfway to the western horizon, Garrett pulled the horse to a stop beside a small creek that cut through the rocks. He dismounted and then helped Hope down, his hand steady at her waist. She stood unsteadily, her legs cramped from the long ride. "Drink," Garrett said, gesturing to the creek. "We still have a ways to go." Hope knelt by the water and drank deeply, the cool liquid soothing her parched throat. When she looked up, Garrett was crouched on the other side of the creek, filling a canteen. He did not watch her, did not leer or make demands. He simply went about his business as if she were just another traveler, not property he had purchased. When he finished with the canteen, he walked back to where she stood and pulled the folded contract from his vest. Hope tensed, waiting for him to outline his expectations, to list the duties she would perform, the rules she would follow. Instead, he tore the paper in half, then in half again, and let the pieces fall into the creek. They floated for a moment before the current caught them and carried them away. Hope stared at the disappearing fragments, her mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed. "I do not understand," she whispered. Garrett met her gaze, and she saw something fierce and determined in his eyes. "You are free," he said simply. "That is all you need to understand. But you paid for me. You paid $150. And now I am choosing to let you go. You do not owe me anything, Hope Richardson. You are not my servant or my property. You are free." The words seemed impossible, too good to be real. Hope shook her head, searching his face for the trap, the hidden claws, the cruelty that must be lurking beneath this apparent kindness. "Why?" she demanded. "Why would you do that?" Garrett was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the surrounding hills. When he spoke, his voice was low and rough with emotion. 5 years ago, my sister was sold into indenture to pay my father's gambling debts. I was 18, too young and too poor to stop it. I tried to find her, tried to buy her freedom, but by the time I had saved enough money, she was gone. Dead from fever, they said, worked to exhaustion in some rich man's house in Denver. He looked back at Hope, and the pain in his eyes was raw and real. "I could not save her, But I can save you." Hope felt tears prick her eyes, the first she had allowed herself since this nightmare began. "I am sorry about your sister," she said softly. "So am I." Garrett cleared his throat and straightened his shoulders. "My ranch is about 10 miles north of here. You are welcome to come there to rest and decide what you want to do next. Or if you prefer, I can take you back to town, or anywhere else you want to go. The choice is yours." Hope looked down at the shackles still encircling her wrists. Garrett followed her gaze and cursed under his breath. "I should have gotten the key from that bastard auctioneer. I will get those off you as soon as we reach the ranch. I have tools there." She nodded slowly, her mind still reeling. Freedom. The word seemed foreign, impossible. But as she stood there by the creek with this strange, kind man who had torn up her indenture contract without asking anything in return, she felt the first fragile stirring of hope that matched her name. "I will come with you," she said finally, "to your ranch. If the offer is truly made without obligation." "It is," Garrett assured her. "You have my word." They mounted the horse again and continued north. As they rode, Hope found herself studying the man who had become her unlikely savior. The set of his shoulders, the way he moved with the horse's rhythm, the careful way he adjusted his pace whenever the terrain grew rough. He was aware of her behind him, she realized, making sure she was comfortable and secure, though he did not speak. The sun was touching the horizon when they finally crested a rise, and Hope saw the ranch spread out below them. It was larger than she had expected, with a sturdy house built of adobe and wood, a good-sized barn, several outbuildings and corrals that held at least a dozen horses. The land stretched out around it, marked by fencing that spoke of careful work and planning. "It is not much," Garrett said, something almost apologetic in his tone. "But it is mine. Took me 3 years to build it up after I left my father's place." "It is beautiful," Hope said, and meant it. There was something solid and real about the ranch, something that spoke of honest labor and care. They rode down into the yard, and a dog came bounding out to greet them, barking enthusiastically. Garrett laughed, the sound startling Hope with its warmth. "Down, Rusty. Mind your manners." The dog, a red-coated mongrel with intelligent eyes, circled the horse but obeyed, his tail wagging furiously. Garrett dismounted and helped Hope down, then led the mare toward the barn. Hope followed, uncertain what else to do, Rusty trotting at her heels. Inside the barn, Garrett unsaddled the horse with practiced efficiency and led her into a stall. He gave the mare fresh water and hay, then turned to Hope. "Come on, let me get those shackles off you." He led her to a workshop area at the back of the barn where tools hung neatly on the walls. He selected a chisel and a hammer, then gestured for Hope to sit on a wooden bench. She complied, holding out her wrists, and Garrett knelt before her. "This might be loud, but it will not hurt," he said. "I will be careful." He positioned the chisel against the lock mechanism and struck it firmly with the hammer. The sound rang through the barn, and Rusty whined from his spot by the door. 3 more strikes and the lock broke. Garrett gently pried the shackle open and removed it from Hope's left wrist, his fingers careful not to touch the raw, reddened skin beneath. He repeated the process with her right wrist, and then the shackles fell away. Hope stared at her freed wrists, hardly daring to believe it. She rubbed at the sore skin, and tears began to flow freely now, silent and hot down her cheeks. All the fear and grief and helplessness of the past month seemed to pour out of her, and she could not stop it, could not hold it back any longer. Garrett stood and turned away, giving her privacy for her tears. He busied himself putting the tools away, making small, unnecessary adjustments, waiting. When Hope's sobs finally subsided into hiccups, he turned back. "There is a pump outside where you can wash up," he said quietly. And I will find you some clean clothes. They will be too big, but they will be better than what you are wearing now. Then I will make us some supper." Hope nodded, wiping at her face with her dirty hands. "Thank you," she managed. "I do not know how to thank you properly for what you have done." "You do not need to thank me," Garrett said. "Just be free. That is thanks enough." He showed her to the pump outside the house, then disappeared inside. Hope worked the pump handle and cold water gushed out. She splashed it on her face and arms, washing away the dust and grime of the auction and the long ride. The water was shockingly cold but wonderful, and she drank from her cupped hands. Garrett emerged from the house carrying a bundle of clothes. "These were my sister's," he said, his voice tight. "I kept them, thinking maybe someday I would find her and she could use them again, but I think she would be glad to know they are helping someone else." Hope took the clothes carefully, reverently. "Are you certain?" "I am certain." Garrett gestured to the house. "The bedroom on the left is empty. You can change in there and rest if you want. Take all the time you need." Inside, the house was simple but clean, with whitewashed walls and sturdy furniture. The bedroom Garrett had indicated held a bed with a real mattress and clean linens, a washstand with a chipped basin, and a small trunk. Hope closed the door and peeled off her filthy dress, examining the clean clothes Garrett had given her. There was a simple cotton dress in a pale blue, undergarments, and even a pair of stockings. Everything was slightly worn but well cared for, mended with neat stitches where necessary. She dressed slowly, marveling at the feel of clean fabric against her skin. The dress was indeed too large, meant for someone taller and broader, but she found a sash in the trunk that she used to cinch the waist. When she looked at her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand, she hardly recognized herself. She looked less like a piece of auctioned property and more like a person again. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Garrett in the kitchen area, stirring something in a pot over the stove. He glanced up and nodded approval. "Better, much better." Hope hesitated, then moved closer. "Can I help?" "You do not have to. You are a guest here, not a servant, I know. But I would like to help anyway, if you do not mind. I am not used to sitting idle." Garrett studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. Can you slice that bread?" He gestured to a loaf on the counter. They worked together in comfortable silence, and Hope felt some of the tension begin to ease from her shoulders. This was familiar territory, the simple rhythm of preparing a meal. Garrett had made a thick stew with beef and vegetables, and the smell made Hope's stomach clench with hunger. She could not remember the last time she had eaten a proper meal. When everything was ready, they sat at the small table, and Garrett served them both generous portions. Hope ate slowly at first, mindful of her empty stomach, but the food was so good that she could not help but speed up. Garrett ate steadily, watching her with something that might have been satisfaction. "You are a good cook," Hope said between bites. "Had to learn when I struck out on my own. A man can only eat his own burnt attempts so many times before he figures it out." Hope smiled, a small genuine thing that felt strange on her face after so long. "How long have you had this ranch?" 3 years, like I said. Saved every penny I could working on other people's ranches, then bought this land cheap because it was considered too far out, too wild. Spent the first year just building the house and barn, breaking horses to sell so I could afford supplies. It has been hard, but it is mine. No one can take it from me. You break horses, train them mostly. Some need breaking, but I prefer to work with them young, earn their trust rather than fight them. It takes longer, but the result is better. A horse that trusts you will do anything for you. A horse you have broken will only obey out of fear, and fear makes for unpredictable behavior." Hope considered this, hearing the philosophy beneath his words. "Is that why you freed me? Because you believe trust is better than force. Garrett met her eyes across the table. I freed you because it was the right thing to do, because no person should own another, no matter what the law says. My sister used to tell me that there are two kinds of strength in this world, the strength to take what you want and the strength to give what is needed. She believed the second kind was harder and more valuable. I think she was right. She sounds like she was a wise person. She was. She was also stubborn and funny and kind. She would have liked you, I think. They finished their meal, and Hope helped Garrett clean up. The domestic simplicity of it all felt surreal. This morning she had been in shackles on an auction block, certain her life was over in every way that mattered. Now she stood in a clean kitchen with a full stomach and her wrists unbound, doing dishes beside a man who asked nothing from her. When the work was done, Garrett showed her around the rest of the house. Besides the bedroom she had used, there was his own room, a small parlor area with a fireplace, and a covered porch that looked out over the valley. The house was not large, but it was well built and cared for. You can stay in that bedroom as long as you need, Garrett said. There is a bolt on the inside of the door if you want to use it. You are safe here, Hope. I promise you that. Hope felt her throat tighten again. I believe you, she said, and realized she meant it. There was something fundamentally decent about Garrett Pierce, something that made her trust him despite every lesson her hard life had taught her about trusting men. That night, Hope lay in the comfortable bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch. Horses moving in the corral, the wind in the eaves, the distant call of a coyote. She touched her wrists, feeling the absence of the shackles like a phantom sensation. Free, she thought. I am free. But freedom, she realized, was a strange and frightening thing when you had no money, no family, and no clear path forward. What would she do now? Where would she go? The questions circled in her mind like vultures, but exhaustion finally pulled her under into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke to morning light streaming through the window and the smell of coffee. For a moment, she was disoriented, unsure where she was, then memory rushed back. She dressed quickly in the borrowed clothes and made her way to the kitchen. Garrett was already up, dressed in work clothes and pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. He looked up when she entered. Morning. Coffee, please. Hope accepted the cup gratefully and took a sip. It was strong and hot and perfect. I have work to do today, Garrett said, settling into a chair with his own cup. Training a young mare I sold to a rancher up north. He is coming to pick her up tomorrow, so I need to put her through her paces one more time. You are welcome to come watch if you want, or you can stay here and rest. Whatever you prefer. I would like to watch, Hope said. If I would not be in the way, you would not be in the way. After a breakfast of eggs and more of the good bread, Garrett led the way out to the corrals. He moved with purpose, and Hope found herself admiring the easy confidence with which he carried himself. He was not a large man in the way of some cowboys she had seen, all bluster and swagger, but there was a quiet strength to him that seemed more substantial. The mare he led out of the barn was a beauty, young and spirited with a gleaming chestnut coat. She danced at the end of the lead rope, tossing her head, and Garrett spoke to her in a low, soothing voice. Easy, girl. We are going to show off a bit today. Show Miss Richardson here what you have learned. Hope climbed onto the corral fence and watched as Garrett worked with the horse. He moved her through various exercises, his commands gentle but firm, his patience evident. When the mare balked at something, he did not force her but instead backed up and tried a different approach. It was mesmerizing to watch, the silent communication between man and animal, the gradual building of trust. An hour passed, then 2. The sun climbed higher and the heat intensified, but Hope barely noticed. She was captivated by the work, by the glimpses it gave her into Garrett's character. This was a man who valued patience and understanding, who saw strength in gentleness. When Garrett finally led the mare back to the barn, he was sweating and slightly dusty but smiling. "She will do well," he said, patting the horse's neck. "She has a good heart." "You have a gift for this," Hope observed, climbing down from the fence. "I just pay attention to what the horses tell me. Most folks are too busy talking to listen." He unsaddled the mare and brushed her down, then turned to Hope. "I need to ride out and check the fences on the north pasture this afternoon. Should take a few hours." "You will be all right here on your own, of course." Hope hesitated, then said, "Garrett, I need to ask you something." "Ask." "What happens next? For me, I mean. I am grateful beyond words for what you have done, but I cannot stay here forever living off your charity. I need to figure out what I am going to do, how I am going to support myself." Garrett leaned against the barn wall, considering her question. "What do you want to do?" "I do not know," Hope admitted. "I can cook and clean and sew. I can read and write and do sums. But I have no money, no references, no family. Who would hire me? Someone would. But you do not need to figure it all out today or tomorrow or even next week. You have been through an ordeal. Give yourself time to catch your breath. But I do not want to be a burden to you." "You are not a burden." Garrett's voice was firm. "And if you want to feel useful while you are here, there are always things that need doing on a ranch, but only if you want to, Hope. Not because you owe me. You do not owe me anything." Hope studied his face, seeing only sincerity there. "All right," she said finally. "Thank you." The days began to settle into a rhythm. Garrett would rise early to tend the horses and handle the various tasks required to keep the ranch running. Hope found herself naturally falling into helping with the cooking and housework. Not because she felt obligated, but because it gave her something to do, a way to contribute that felt right. Garrett accepted her help without comment, treating her as a partner in the daily routine rather than a servant or a guest. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch as the desert cooled, and they talked. Garrett told her about his childhood, about growing up with an abusive, gambling, addicted father and a mother who had died when he was young. His sister, Grace, had been 3 years younger, and he had tried to protect her from their father's rages and disappointments. But in the end, he had failed her. "I was working a roundup over in Colorado when my father sold her indenture," Garrett said one evening, his voice heavy with old grief. "By the time I got back and found out what he had done, she was already gone. I spent 2 years tracking rumors, following leads, but I was always one step behind. When I finally found out she had died, I was in Denver, standing in the rain outside the house where she had worked. They would not even tell me where she was buried." Hope reached over and placed her hand over his, a gesture of comfort. "It was not your fault, Garrett. You did everything you could." "Did I? I sometimes wonder if I had been smarter faster, if I had saved my money better or looked in different places, whether I could have reached her in time." "You cannot torture yourself with what-ifs. I know it is easier said than done, but the only person responsible for what happened to Grace was your father and the people who worked her to death. Not you." Garrett turned his hand under hers so their palms pressed together, his fingers curling around hers. "Thank you for saying that." They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped, and Hope felt something warm unfurling in her chest. She had thought herself beyond the reach of such feelings, had believed that the auction block and everything leading up to it had broken something fundamental in her. But here, in the quiet evening with this good man beside her, she felt the stirring of something she had not expected to feel again. Hope, joy, attraction. She pulled her hand back gently, suddenly nervous. "I should turn in. Tomorrow I want to tackle the mending. I noticed you have a pile of shirts that need attention." "You do not have to do that, I know, but I want to. The weeks passed, summer deepening into late August. Hope found herself settling into life on the ranch in ways she had not anticipated. She learned the rhythms of the horses, the patterns of Garrett's work. She cooked meals that made him close his eyes in appreciation, mended his clothes with neat, invisible stitches, and kept the house clean and welcoming. But more than that, she found herself coming alive again in ways both small and significant. She laughed at Garrett's dry humor, debated with him about everything from politics to poetry, and discovered that he had taught himself to read using his sister's schoolbooks and possessed a hungry, curious mind. He borrowed books from a teacher in Abiquiu whenever he went to town for supplies, and he and Hope would read aloud to each other in the evenings, taking turns with the voices. She also began to help with the horses, tentatively at first, but with growing confidence as Garrett taught her his methods. She learned to read their body language, to understand what they needed, to build trust slowly and carefully. It was satisfying work, and she discovered she had an aptitude for it. One morning in early September, Hope was in the kitchen kneading bread when Garrett came in from the barn with an odd expression on his face. "What is it?" she asked, concerned. "I need to make a trip into Santa Fe," he said. "There is a livestock auction there, and I heard they might have a breeding mare I have been looking for. Good bloodlines, the kind that could really improve my stock. I will be gone 3 days, maybe 4. "Oh." Hope felt an unexpected stab of disappointment. She had grown so accustomed to his presence, to their daily routines and evening conversations. The thought of the house without him felt strange and empty. "You will be all right here?" Garrett asked. "There is plenty of food and you know how to handle the horses. Rusty will keep you company." "Of course I will be all right," Hope said, forcing brightness into her voice. "I am not a child. I know that." Garrett moved closer, and Hope was suddenly very aware of the flour dusting her hands, the heat from the stove, the way he was looking at her. "Hope, I need to tell you something before I go." Her heart began to beat faster. "What is it?" "These past weeks with you here, they have been the best I have had since Grace died, maybe the best I have ever had. You have brought life back to this place, and more than that, you have brought life back to me. I find myself looking forward to each day in a way I have not in years, and it is because of you." Hope stared at him, hardly daring to breathe. "Garrett, I am not saying this to pressure you or to make you feel obligated," he continued, the words coming faster now, as if he needed to get them out before he lost his nerve. "I know you have been through hell, and I know you need time to figure out your own path. But I needed you to know that having you here is not charity for me. It is a gift. You are a gift." Something broke open in Hope's chest, a dam of emotion she had been holding back without fully realizing it. "You are a good man, Garrett Pierce," she said softly. "The best man I have ever known. And these weeks have been a gift for me too. I was so lost, so certain that my life was over in every way that mattered. But you gave me back my freedom, and more than that, you gave me back myself. You treated me like a person worth knowing, worth talking to, worth caring about. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" Garrett reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and gently brushed a strand of hair back from her face. His fingers lingered against her cheek, and Hope felt herself leaning into the touch. "I see you, Hope Richardson," he said quietly. "I see your strength and your kindness and your sharp mind. I see the way you gentle the horses and the way you hum while you cook. I see you, and I like everything I see." "I see you too," Hope whispered, "and I more than like what I see." They stood there in the warm kitchen, the moment stretching between them like something tangible and precious. Then Garrett leaned down slowly, telegraphing his intention, and Hope rose on her toes to meet him. Their lips touched, soft and tentative, a question and an answer all at once. The kiss was gentle, respectful, and over far too soon. When they pulled apart, both were breathing a little faster, and Hope felt her cheeks flush with heat that had nothing to do with the stove. "I should go," Garrett said, though he made no move to step away. "If I am going to make Santa Fe before nightfall." "Be safe," Hope said. "Come back to me." Something fierce and bright flared in Garrett's eyes at those words. "I will. I promise you I will." He kissed her again, longer this time, and Hope felt herself melting into it, her flour-dusted hands coming up to rest against his chest. When they finally broke apart, Garrett was smiling, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face into something younger and lighter. 3 days, he said, 4 at the most, and then we will talk about this, about us, about what comes next, if you want to, that is. "I want to," Hope assured him. "Now go before you lose the daylight." She watched from the porch as he rode away, one hand raised in farewell. When he disappeared over the rise, she went back inside, touching her lips with wondering fingers. She had been kissed before, clumsy stolen kisses from boys in Abiquiu before her life had fallen apart. But nothing like this. Nothing that felt like possibility and promise, and the beginning of something real. The 3 days passed slowly. Hope kept herself busy with chores and with the horses, but the evenings felt long and lonely without Garrett's presence, without their conversations and the comfortable silence they had developed. Rusty seemed to sense her mood and stayed close, his warm bulk a comfort against the strange ache of missing someone. On the evening of the 3rd day, Hope was in the kitchen preparing a simple supper when Rusty began barking excitedly. She hurried to the door and saw Garrett riding in, leading a beautiful dapple gray mare behind him. Relief and joy surged through her, and she ran out to meet him, propriety forgotten. Garrett dismounted and caught her up in his arms, spinning her around once before setting her down. "Missed you," he said, grinning. "Missed you too," Hope admitted, breathless and happy. "I take it you found your mare." "I did, and for a good price too, but I found something else as well." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "For you." Hope took the package, surprised. "You did not have to bring me anything." "I wanted to. Open it." She carefully unwrapped the paper to reveal a beautiful shawl, soft wool dyed in deep shades of blue and green. It was the nicest thing anyone had ever given her, and tears pricked her eyes. "Garrett, it is too much." "It is not nearly enough," he said. "But it is a start. I saw it in a shop window, and the colors reminded me of your eyes, the way they shift between green and blue depending on the light. I wanted you to have something that was yours, not borrowed, not hand-me-down, but truly yours." Hope wrapped the shawl around her shoulders, feeling the softness of it, the weight of his thoughtfulness. "Thank you," she said, "for this and for everything. I do not have the words to tell you what you mean to me." "Then show me," Garrett said softly. Hope reached up and pulled him down into a kiss, pouring everything she felt into it. All her gratitude and her growing affection, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, she had found a place where she truly belonged. Garrett responded with equal fervor, his arms coming around her waist, holding her close but not too tight, always careful, always respectful. When they finally broke apart, both were flushed and smiling. "I need to tend to the horses," Garrett said reluctantly, "and then we should talk." "We should," Hope agreed. They worked together to settle the horses for the night, the new mare getting a stall of her own where she could adjust to her surroundings. Then they went inside, and Hope served the supper she had prepared while Garrett told her about his trip, about the auction and the mare and the news he had heard in Santa Fe. When the meal was finished and the dishes washed, they moved to the porch, drawn by habit and the need for the serious conversation that waited. The sun was setting in brilliant shades of orange and pink, and the air was finally cooling after the day's heat. "Hope," Garrett began, then paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I want you to know that everything I said before I left I meant. You have changed my life in the best possible way. But I also know that you might not feel the same, or you might feel it is too soon, or you might have plans that do not include staying on a remote ranch with a horse trainer. Whatever you decide, I will respect it." Hope turned to face him fully. "Do you want to know what I think? I think that a few months ago, my life ended. Everything I knew, everything I had was taken from me, and I was sold like an animal. I thought that was the end of my story, that there was nothing left but survival and endurance. But then you stood up in that auction and paid too much money for me, and then you set me free without asking anything in return. You gave me my life back, Garrett. But more than that, you gave me a reason to want that life." "Hope," he breathed, reaching for her hand. She laced her fingers through his. "I am not saying I have it all figured out. I am still scared sometimes, still angry at what was done to me, still grieving for my parents and the life I had before. But I am also learning to be happy again, to look forward instead of back. And when I imagine my future now, you are in it. If you want to be." "If I want to be," Garrett laughed, the sound full of relief and joy. "Hope Richardson, I have wanted that since about the second week you were here, when I came in from working with a particularly difficult stallion and found you humming in the kitchen with flour on your nose, and I realized that this house had never felt like home until you were in it." Hope felt tears spilling over, but they were good tears, happy tears. "I love you," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "I did not plan to, and I am probably saying it too soon, but I do. I love you, Garrett Pierce." "I love you too," Garrett said, pulling her into his arms. "So much. More than I thought I could love anyone." They held each other as the sunset faded into twilight, and Hope felt a peace settle over her that she had not known in years. This was what she had been missing, what she had needed without knowing it. Not just safety or security, but love. True, honest, freely given love. "Will you marry me?" Garrett asked suddenly, pulling back to look at her face. "I know it is fast, and I know we have only known each other a couple of months, but I have never been more certain of anything. I want you in my life, Hope. Not as a guest or a helper, but as my partner, my wife. Will you marry me?" Hope did not even need to think about it. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Garrett kissed her then, deep and thorough and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both were laughing, giddy with happiness and the sudden certainty of their future together. "We should do it soon," Garrett said. "I do not want to wait. Is that all right?" "That is more than all right. I do not want to wait either." They made plans that night, sitting close together on the porch. They would ride into Abiquiu in a few days and arrange for the wedding. It would be simple, just them and whatever witnesses the circuit preacher required, but it would be real and legal and binding. Hope would become Hope Pierce, and the life she had thought was over would truly begin anew. The next few days were a flurry of preparation. Hope took apart one of the dresses Garrett's sister had left behind, a pale green one that was the nicest of the lot, and remade it to fit her properly. She washed her hair with the good soap Garrett brought from town and brushed it until it shone. Garrett cleaned and mended his best suit, the one he wore for important business, and tried to tame his usually unruly hair with limited success. On a bright morning in mid-September, they rode into Abiquiu together. Hope wore her remade dress and the beautiful shawl Garrett had given her, and she carried a small bouquet of wildflowers Garrett had picked for her at dawn. Her heart beat fast as they entered the town, nervous about seeing the people who had watched her sold, worried about their judgment and their gossip. But Garrett seemed to sense her anxiety. He reached over and squeezed her hand. "You have nothing to be ashamed of," he said firmly. "You did nothing wrong, and anyone who treats you with anything less than respect will answer to me." His fierce protectiveness made her smile, and she lifted her chin as they rode through the streets. Let them stare. Let them whisper. She was free, and she was loved, and she was about to marry the best man she had ever known. That was all that mattered. The circuit preacher was in town, as Garrett had confirmed by telegram, and he agreed to perform the ceremony that very afternoon in the small church at the edge of town. They found 2 witnesses among the more kindly residents, an older couple who ran the general store and who had always been decent to Hope's family. The ceremony was brief and simple. Hope and Garrett stood before the preacher and spoke their vows in clear, steady voices. When Garrett slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, a ring that had belonged to his mother, Hope felt her heart swell with emotion. And when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, and Garrett kissed her in front of God and the witnesses, she felt like she was floating. They emerged from the church into the afternoon sunlight as Mr. and Mrs. Pierce, and Hope could not stop smiling. Garrett looked equally happy, his usually serious face transformed by joy. They stopped at the general store to buy a few supplies, and the older couple who had witnessed their wedding gave them a jar of honey and a bag of good coffee as a wedding gift. "May you have many happy years together," the woman said kindly, and Hope thanked her with genuine warmth. They rode back to the ranch in the golden late afternoon light, and everything seemed touched with magic. The familiar landscape looked different somehow, more beautiful, more like home. When they reached the ranch and Garrett lifted Hope down from the horse, he held her a moment longer than necessary. "Welcome home, Mrs. Pierce," he said softly. "It feels good to be home, Mr. Pierce," Hope replied and kissed him. They tended the horses together, then went inside. Hope felt suddenly nervous, aware that this was their wedding night, that everything was about to change. But Garrett, as always, seemed to understand. He took her hand and led her to the kitchen. "I am going to make us a wedding supper," he announced. "And you are going to sit there and let me, because you deserve to be waited on for once." Hope laughed, the tension easing. "I will not argue with that." She sat at the table, still wearing her wedding dress, and watched as Garrett prepared a meal with surprising skill. He told her silly stories about his early attempts at cooking, making her laugh until her sides hurt. They ate by candlelight, talking about everything and nothing, and it felt perfect and right and natural. Later, when the dishes were washed and the house was quiet, Garrett took Hope's hand and led her to his room, which was now their room. He was gentle and patient, letting Hope set the pace, always careful of her comfort. And when they finally came together as husband and wife, it was sweet and passionate and full of love. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Hope rested her head on Garrett's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I never thought I could be this happy," she whispered. "Neither did I," Garrett replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "But here we are. Here we are," Hope echoed, smiling in the darkness. The months that followed were the happiest of Hope's life. She and Garrett fell into an easy partnership, working the ranch together, training horses together, building their life together. Hope discovered that she had a real talent for the horse training, and together they developed a reputation for producing well-trained, reliable animals. Their business grew, and with it, their prosperity. Winter came, bringing cold nights and occasional snow to the high desert. Hope and Garrett would huddle close by the fire in the evenings, reading or talking or simply being together. They made plans for the future, talking about expanding the ranch, maybe breeding cattle as well as horses, maybe hiring a hand or two to help with the increased work. In February, Hope realized her monthly courses were late. She waited another week to be sure, then told Garrett one evening as they sat together after supper. His face transformed with wonder and joy, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of something precious and fragile. "Are you happy?" Hope asked, suddenly nervous. "Happy." Garrett pulled back to look at her, and there were tears in his eyes. "Hope, I am more than happy. I am blessed beyond measure. We are going to have a child, a family. I never dared to hope for something like this." "We are going to be parents," Hope said, the reality of it hitting her. "That is terrifying and wonderful all at once." "We will figure it out together," Garrett assured her, "just like we have figured out everything else." The pregnancy progressed well, though Hope had some morning sickness in the early months that left her queasy and tired. Garrett was endlessly patient, taking over more of the heavy work and making sure Hope rested. He read everything he could find about pregnancy and childbirth, determined to be prepared. As Hope's belly grew round with their child, she found herself marveling at the turns her life had taken. A year ago, she had been standing on an auction block, certain her life was over. Now she was married to a man she loved, living on a ranch that was thriving and carrying a child who would be born free, loved, and wanted. The transformation was so complete it sometimes took her breath away. In late September, almost exactly a year after their wedding, Hope went into labor. Garrett rode hard to fetch the midwife from town, a capable woman named Mrs. Sanchez, who had delivered half the babies in the territory. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Garrett paced outside the bedroom door, terrified by Hope's cries of pain. But finally, in the early hours of the morning, he heard a new sound, the thin, furious wail of a newborn. Mrs. Sanchez opened the door, smiling tiredly. "You have a son," she said. "A healthy, strong son, and your wife is tired but doing well." Garrett stumbled into the room and saw Hope propped up in the bed, looking exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up as he approached, and her smile was like the sun. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Garrett knelt beside the bed and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blankets. The baby had a dusting of dark hair and was making small, snuffling sounds, his eyes squeezed shut. Garrett reached out one finger and gently touched his son's cheek, overcome with emotion. "He is perfect," Garrett whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you, Hope. Thank you for this gift." "We made him together," Hope said, leaning her head against Garrett's shoulder. "What should we call him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at his son's face, Garrett thought of his sister, of her strength and kindness, and of the legacy she had left him. "What about Gabriel?" he suggested. "It means strength of God." "And his middle name could be Ray, after your father." "Gabriel Ray Pierce." Hope tested the name, then smiled. "It is perfect. Hello, Gabriel. Welcome to the world." Mrs. Sanchez stayed for a few days to help Hope recover and to teach both parents the basics of caring for a newborn. Gabriel was a good baby, mostly content as long as he was fed and warm, and both Hope and Garrett fell completely in love with him. The first year of Gabriel's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and precious moments. Garrett proved to be a devoted father, always ready to walk the baby when he fussed, to change soiled diapers without complaint, to sit and rock his son while Hope caught a few hours of desperately needed sleep. They worked together as a team, sharing the responsibilities and the joys. Gabriel grew strong and healthy, hitting his milestones right on schedule. He smiled early and laughed often, a happy child who seemed to embody all the love his parents poured into him. Hope would sometimes watch Garrett playing with their son, making silly faces to provoke those baby laughs, and feel her heart so full she thought it might burst. The ranch continued to prosper. Word of their skill with horses spread, and they found themselves with more work than they could handle. Garrett hired a young man named Tom to help with the day-to-day tasks, giving him and Hope more time to focus on the training and on their growing family. When Gabrielle was 18 months old, Hope realized she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. The baby, a daughter they named Emma Grace after Garrett's sister, was born in the spring, a tiny thing with her mother's auburn hair and her father's gray eyes. Gabrielle was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help to hold her, to show her his toys. Garrett and Hope would watch their children together and feel overwhelmed with gratitude for the life they had built. The years rolled on, bringing change and growth. The ranch expanded, the house was added onto, and more children came. Another son, Henry, arrived 2 years after Emma, followed 3 years later by twin girls, Lucy and Sarah. The house was always full of noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of family life. Hope threw herself into motherhood and into the work of the ranch with equal passion. She trained horses alongside Garrett, managed the household, taught her children to read and write and care for the animals. She was busy and challenged and, more than anything, happy. Garrett proved to be everything she could have hoped for in a husband and a father. He was patient with the children, teaching them with the same gentle firmness he used with the horses. He was loving with Hope, always making sure she knew how much he appreciated her, how much he valued their partnership. And he worked tirelessly to provide for his family, to build something lasting that they could all be proud of. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Garrett planned a surprise for Hope. He arranged for Tom and his wife to watch the children for the night, and he took Hope on a ride up into the hills, to a spot that overlooked the ranch and the valley beyond. They sat together on a blanket, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Garrett produced a bottle of wine and 2 tin cups, and they toasted to their years together. "You remember the day we met?" Garrett asked, pulling Hope close against his side. "How could I forget? You saved my life that day." "No," Garrett said firmly. "I just gave you a chance. You saved your own life, Hope. You took that chance and ran with it. You built this life with me, worked beside me, loved me even when I was too stubborn or too focused on work. Everything we have, everything we are, we did together." Hope looked out at the ranch below, at the home they had built, the family they had created, the life they had forged from nothing. "I was so lost that day," she said quietly, "so certain that there was nothing left for me but misery. And then you stood up and bid on me, and my whole world changed." "My world changed too," Garrett said. "I had been so focused on work, on building the ranch, on trying to outrun my guilt over Grace. I did not realize how lonely I was until you came into my life. You brought color and warmth and love into the gray existence I had created. You gave me a reason to live instead of just survive." "We gave each other that," Hope said, turning to kiss him. "We saved each other." They sat together as the stars came out, talking about the children, about the ranch, about their dreams for the future. They talked about everything and nothing, the way they always had, the easy communication that had been the foundation of their relationship from the beginning. "I want to grow old with you," Garrett said eventually. "I want to watch our children grow up and have children of their own. I want to sit on our porch when we are gray and creaky and remember all of this. Every moment, every struggle, every triumph, all of it. We will," Hope promised. "We have a whole lifetime ahead of us." And they did. The years continued to unfold, bringing joy and sorrow, challenge and triumph. They faced drought years when money was tight and hope was scarce, but they endured together. They celebrated the successes, like when Gabriel showed his first horse at the territorial fair and won a blue ribbon, or when Emma announced she wanted to be a teacher, and Hope helped her study for the exams. They weathered loss too. Tom, their faithful ranch hand, passed away suddenly from a heart condition, and they mourned him as family. Hope's distant cousin, her only remaining relative, came to visit once but made it clear she disapproved of Hope's rough frontier life, and they did not speak again. But through it all, Hope and Garrett had each other, and that was enough. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and passions. Gabriel loved the horses and the ranch work, eager to follow in his father's footsteps. Emma was bookish and thoughtful, often found with her nose in a book when she should have been doing chores. Henry was the adventurer, always exploring, always pushing boundaries. And the twins, Lucy and Sarah, were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and getting into mischief together. Hope and Garrett navigated parenthood with love and patience, not always getting it right, but always trying their best. They taught their children to work hard, to treat others with respect, to value honesty and integrity. And they made sure their children knew they were loved, completely and unconditionally. As the children entered their teenage years, the house seemed to shrink, suddenly too small for all the growing bodies and developing personalities. Garrett and Hope found themselves mediating sibling disputes, helping with homework, teaching the older children to handle more responsibility on the ranch. It was exhausting and rewarding in equal measure. There were nights when Hope fell into bed too tired to speak, and mornings when Garrett wondered if he had the energy to face another day. But they supported each other, took turns when one was overwhelmed, and found moments of peace and connection wherever they could. On their 20th anniversary, Hope and Garrett took a rare day to themselves. The older children were capable of watching the younger ones for a few hours, so they rode out to the creek where Garrett had torn up Hope's indenture contract so many years before. The spot was exactly as Hope remembered it, the water still flowing clear and cold over the rocks. They dismounted and stood together, hand in hand, remembering. 20 years, Hope marveled. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like it was just yesterday that you pulled me up onto your horse and took me home. Best decision I ever made, Garrett said, pulling her into his arms. Marrying you, building a life with you, raising our children with you. None of it has been easy, but all of it has been worth it. I love you, Garrett Pierce, Hope said, the words as true now as they had been on their wedding day. More now than I did then, if that is possible. You have been my partner, my friend, my love, my everything. And you have been mine, Garrett replied. Here is to another 20 years if we are lucky, and another 20 after that. They kissed beside the creek, surrounded by the beauty of the land they had made their own, and Hope felt the same flutter in her chest she had felt that first time in the kitchen, all those years ago. Some things, she realized, never changed. Some loves were meant to last a lifetime. The years continued their march. Gabriel, now a young man of 21, announced his engagement to a sweet girl from town, and Hope found herself planning a wedding, remembering her own simple ceremony and feeling grateful that Gabriel could have something grander. Emma left for teacher training in Santa Fe, determined to make her mark on the world, and Hope tried not to worry too much about her bookish daughter navigating the city alone. Henry talked constantly of seeing more of the territory, maybe even going east to see the cities and the ocean, and Hope and Garrett struggled with wanting to hold him close and knowing they had to let him follow his dreams. And the twins, now 15, were beginning to notice boys, much to Garrett's dismay and Hope's amusement. I am not ready for this, Garrett said one evening, watching Lucy and Sarah giggle over some private joke. They are still my little girls. How are they old enough to be thinking about courting? The same way Gabriel is old enough to get married, Hope said gently. They grow up, Garrett. It is what they are supposed to do, and we raised them well. They will make good choices. I know. I just wish they could stay young forever. Hope understood the sentiment. Some days she looked at her children and still saw the babies they had been, the toddlers learning to walk, the youngsters getting into trouble. But they were becoming adults now, finding their own paths, and she and Garrett had to learn to let go, bit by bit. Gabriel's wedding was a joyous affair, held at the ranch with half the territory in attendance. Hope watched her eldest son marry his sweetheart, and she felt a bittersweet mix of pride and nostalgia. When had her little boy become this confident young man, speaking his vows with such certainty? Garrett squeezed her hand during the ceremony, and she knew he was feeling the same mix of emotions. They had done their job, raised their son to be a good, strong man. Now they had to trust that he would build his own life, his own happiness. Within a year, Gabriel and his wife made Garrett and Hope grandparents, a baby boy they named William. Hope held her grandson for the first time and felt her heart expand in ways she had not anticipated. This tiny person was part of her legacy, part of the love she and Garrett had built. "I am a grandmother," she said to Garrett, slightly awed. "When did we get old enough to be grandparents? Speak for yourself," Garrett teased, though his hair was now more gray than dark. "I am still in my prime." They laughed together, and Hope marveled at how comfortable they were with each other, how well they still fit together after more than 2 decades. They had weathered storms and celebrated triumphs, raised children and built a thriving ranch. They had loved and fought and forgiven and grown. And through it all, they had remained partners in the truest sense of the word. Emma returned from her training and secured a teaching position in Abiquiu, much to Hope's delight. Having her daughter close again was a gift, and Hope loved hearing about Emma's students, her challenges, her triumphs in the classroom. Emma had inherited Hope's determination and Garrett's patience, and she was a natural teacher. Henry did eventually leave, joining a cattle drive heading to Denver, and Hope worried constantly until his letters arrived, full of excitement and adventure. He promised to return, but Hope sensed he had caught the wandering bug and might roam for years before settling. She tried to be content with that, tried to remember that each of her children was different with different needs and dreams. The twins graduated from the small school in Abiquiu, and both decided to stay closer to home. Lucy began courting the son of a neighboring rancher, while Sarah declared her intention to remain single and help run the Pierce ranch. Garrett was secretly delighted to have at least one child who wanted to carry on his work, and he began teaching Sarah everything he knew about horse training and ranch management. As Hope approached her 50th birthday, she took stock of her life and felt profound gratitude. She had survived horrors and emerged stronger. She had found love when she least expected it. She had built a family and a home and a life that mattered. The girl who had stood on the auction block, terrified and alone, seemed like a different person now, though Hope never forgot her. That girl's courage and resilience had brought her here, to this moment, to this beautiful, complicated, joyful life. Garrett, now in his mid-50s, had slowed down some, his body showing the wear of decades of hard physical work. But he was still strong, still capable, still devoted to his family and his ranch. He and Hope worked side by side most days, comfortable in their routines, finding joy in the simple rhythms of their life together. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, a familiar ritual after all these years, Garrett turned to Hope with a serious expression. "I have been thinking," he said, "about the future, about the ranch, about everything we have built." And Hope prompted, sensing something important coming. "I want to make sure it is all protected, all secure. I want to draw up proper papers, make sure that if anything happens to me, you and the children are provided for. I want Gabriel and Sarah to have the ranch if they want it, but I want to make sure you are comfortable for the rest of your life." Hope felt a chill despite the warm evening. "Nothing is going to happen to you, Garrett Pierce. You are too stubborn to go anywhere." "I am serious, Hope. We are not young anymore. We need to plan for these things." "I know," Hope said softly, taking his hand. "You are right. We should make sure everything is in order, but let us not dwell on dark thoughts tonight. Tonight, let us just be grateful for what we have." Garrett nodded and pulled her close. They sat together in the twilight, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night, and Hope felt the same contentment she had felt for years. This was her home. These were her people. This was the life she had chosen and fought for and built with her own hands. More years passed, bringing more changes. Gabriel took over more of the ranch operations as Garrett's health began to decline in small ways. Nothing dramatic, just the gradual slowing that came with age. Hope herself felt the changes too, the way her joints ached on cold mornings, the way she tired more easily than she once had. But they adapted, finding new rhythms, accepting their limitations with grace. Lucy married her rancher's son in a beautiful ceremony, and within a year gave Hope and Garrett another grandchild, a baby girl. Emma, now approaching 30, surprised everyone by announcing her engagement to the Abiquiu doctor, a widower with 2 young children of his own. Emma would become a stepmother and a wife in one day, and Hope could see she was nervous but excited about the prospect. Henry came home for Emma's wedding, bronzed and lean from his years of wandering. He had stories to tell, had seen the ocean and the great cities and the vastness of the country. But he confessed to his parents that he was ready to settle, ready to find a place to call his own. Garrett offered him a piece of the ranch land to build on, and Henry accepted gratefully. Sarah remained single but content, throwing herself into the ranch work with passion and skill. She had become an expert horse trainer in her own right, and she and Garrett made a formidable team. Hope sometimes worried that Sarah was sacrificing her own chances at romance and family for the ranch. But Sarah insisted she was happy, that this was the life she had chosen. "Not everyone needs a husband and children to be fulfilled, Ma," Sarah said one day when Hope gently raised the subject. "You found your happiness with Pa and with us kids. I have found mine in the work, in the land, in the horses. That is enough for me." Hope had to respect that, even as she hoped Sarah might someday find the kind of love Hope had found with Garrett. But she also understood that each person's path was different, and Sarah's choices deserved to be honored. On their 30th anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Gabriel and his growing family, Emma and her husband and stepchildren, Henry and the woman he was courting, Lucy and her husband and children, and Sarah, the glue that held the ranch together. The house was full to bursting with people and noise and love. Hope stood in the kitchen, overseeing the preparation of the anniversary meal, and felt overwhelmed with emotion. 30 years, 3 decades of love and partnership and growth. She and Garrett had built all of this family, this legacy. And it was more than she had ever dared to hope for on that terrible day when she stood on the auction block. Garrett found her in the kitchen and pulled her aside, away from the chaos. "Come with me for a minute." He led her outside and around the house to a quiet spot where they could be alone. The sun was setting, painting the sky in the familiar shades of gold and red that Hope had come to associate with home. 30 years, Garrett said, echoing her thoughts. "Can you believe it?" "Barely," Hope admitted. "Sometimes it feels like we just started, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together." "I want you to know something," Garrett said, taking both her hands in his. These 30 years with you have been the greatest blessing of my life. You took a broken man and made him whole. You gave me a family, a home, a reason to wake up every morning with joy. I know I do not say it enough, but I love you, Hope Pierce. I love you more than words can say." Hope felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I love you too, Garrett. You saved my life in every way a person can be saved. You gave me freedom and love and a future. You gave me everything." They kissed there in the golden light, surrounded by the land they had made their own, and Hope felt the same spark she had felt on their wedding day. 30 years had only deepened their love, made it richer and more complex and more essential. When they returned to the house, their children and grandchildren were waiting with a cake and gifts and toasts. The evening was full of laughter and stories, of remembering and celebrating. Hope looked around the table at all the faces she loved and felt a peace so profound it was almost painful. This was what she had been fighting for all those years ago when she lifted her chin on the auction block and refused to cry. This moment, this family, this life. It had been worth every hardship, every struggle, every moment of fear, because it had led her here, to this place of love and belonging. The years after their 30th anniversary passed more quickly than Hope would have liked. Gabriel's children were growing up, showing interest in continuing the ranch legacy. Emma's stepchildren had become her own in every way that mattered, and she was expecting her first biological child with joy and some trepidation, given her age. Henry had married his sweetheart and was building a house on his piece of land, eager to start his own family. Lucy had 3 children now and talked about maybe one more. And Sarah, still single, had become indispensable to the ranch operation, her skill and dedication ensuring its continued success. Garrett's health, which had been declining gradually, took a more serious turn in his early 60s. A persistent cough turned out to be pneumonia, and though he recovered, he never quite regained his full strength. Hope fussed over him constantly, making sure he did not overwork, making sure he took care of himself. But Garrett was stubborn, always had been, and he insisted on doing his share. "I am not an invalid," he grumbled one day when Hope suggested he rest instead of helping with the horses. "I know you are not," Hope said patiently. "But you are not 25 anymore either. There is no shame in slowing down, in letting Gabriel and Sarah handle more of the heavy work." "I just do not want to be useless," Garrett admitted quietly. Hope pulled him into her arms, holding him tight. "You could never be useless, Garrett Pierce. You built this ranch from nothing. You raised 5 wonderful children. You have been a rock for this family for decades. If you do nothing but sit on that porch and watch the sunset for the rest of your days, you will still be the most valuable person here because you are loved, because you matter. Not for what you can do, but for who you are." Garrett held her close, and Hope felt the slight tremor in his hands, the way his body had become frailer. They were both getting old, she realized with a pang. Their time together, once seeming infinite, was now finite and precious. They made the most of the years they had left. They spent long hours on the porch, watching their grandchildren play, telling stories about the old days. They rode out to their special places when Garrett felt up to it, revisiting the creek where their journey together had truly begun, the hilltop where they had first talked about their future. They held hands and talked and simply enjoyed being together. Garrett made it to their 40th anniversary, though he was weak by then, his body betraying him in ways his spirit never did. The family gathered again, a much larger group now with grandchildren and in-laws and even a few great-grandchildren. Garrett sat in a chair of honor, Hope beside him, and he smiled at the chaos and noise of his legacy. "We did good," he said to Hope, squeezing her hand. "We did better than good," Hope replied. "We did amazing. That night, after everyone had left or gone to bed, Hope helped Garrett to their room. He moved slowly, leaning heavily on her, but he made it. As they lay in bed together, Garrett turned to her in the darkness. "I am tired, Hope," he said quietly, "so tired." Hope felt her heart clench with fear and grief. "I know, my love, I know. I do not want to leave you, I do not want to miss anything, but I am so tired." "Then rest," Hope whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You have earned your rest, Garrett. You have run your race and run it well. And when you are ready, when it is time, I will be all right. The children will be all right. You can let go." "I love you," Garrett breathed. "Tell them I love them. Tell them to take care of each other, to take care of you." "I will tell them, but you can tell them yourself tomorrow. Just rest now." Garrett did rest, and he slept peacefully through the night. Hope lay awake beside him, memorizing the sound of his breathing, the warmth of his body beside hers, trying to hold onto every moment. When dawn came, Garrett woke and smiled at her, that familiar smile that still made her heart flutter. "Still here," he said. "Still here," Hope echoed, smiling through her tears. Garrett lived another 6 months, and they were precious months, full of goodbyes spoken and unspoken, of love reaffirmed, of memories cherished. He spent time with each of his children, sharing wisdom, expressing his love and pride. He held his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, marveling at how the family had grown. And then one quiet morning in early spring, Garrett Pierce passed away in his sleep, Hope's hand in his, surrounded by the love of his family. He was 66 years old, and he left behind a legacy of love and honor and hard work that would endure for generations. Hope grieved deeply for her husband, her partner, her greatest love. The house felt empty without him, the ranch less vibrant, but she was not alone. Her children rallied around her, made sure she was cared for, made sure she knew she was loved and needed. The grandchildren visited often, bringing noise and life back into the quiet house. In time, Hope found a new rhythm to her days. She helped where she could on the ranch, though Sarah had taken over most of the operations. She spent time with her grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, making sure they knew the man he had been. She tended the small garden behind the house and read the books Garrett had collected over the years. And she waited, not unhappily, for the day when she would see him again. She lived another 12 years, long enough to see all her children settled and happy, long enough to welcome more great-grandchildren into the family. She lived long enough to know that the ranch would continue, that the legacy she and Garrett had built would endure. And she lived long enough to know that the love story that had begun on an auction block in Abiquiu, New Mexico, in the summer of 1877, would never truly end. When Hope Richardson Pierce passed away peacefully at the age of 78, she was surrounded by 3 generations of the family she and Garrett had created. Her children held her hands, her grandchildren stood nearby, and her great-grandchildren played quietly in the next room, not understanding but feeling the weight of the moment. She was buried beside Garrett on the ranch they had built together, under a sky as wide and blue as hope itself. And on her headstone, beneath her name and dates, Gabriel had inscribed the words his father had said so many times. "She brought me back to life, and I loved her beyond measure." The ranch continued for generations, passed down through the Pierce family, and with it, the story of Garrett and Hope, of how a cowboy had bid high at an auction, not to own a servant, but to set a woman free. And in that act of unexpected kindness, 2 broken people had found healing and wholeness, and a love that transcended time itself. Their great-great-grandchildren would walk the land they had claimed and worked, would train horses using the methods Garrett had developed, would live with the values Hope and Garrett had instilled in their family. And they would know, because the story was told and retold around dinner tables and in quiet moments that they came from love, that their family had been built on a foundation of courage and kindness, and choosing to do the right thing, even when it was hard. The Pierce family ranch in Abiquiu, New Mexico, became known not just for its fine horses and good land, but for the love story at its heart. The story of how one man, scarred by the loss of his sister to indentured servitude, had seen a woman on an auction block and decided that he would not let another person suffer that fate. The story of how one woman, sold like property and certain her life was over, had found the strength to accept freedom and build a new life. And the story of how those two people, brought together by circumstance and bound together by choice, had created something beautiful and lasting that would echo through generations. It was a story of the Wild West, but more than that, it was a story of the human heart and its capacity for love, for forgiveness, for transformation. It was a story that proved that sometimes in the darkest moments hope could still bloom, that freedom was worth fighting for, and that love, true love, could heal even the deepest wounds and create something that would outlast any single lifetime. And so the story of Garrett and Hope Pierce became part of the fabric of the land itself, woven into the red rocks and endless sky of New Mexico, a testament to what was possible when people chose kindness over cruelty, love over indifference, and hope over despair. It was a story that mattered, that meant something, that changed the world in small but significant ways, and it all began with a cowboy who bid high at an auction, not to own but to free, not to take but to give. And in that moment of unexpected grace, two lives were forever changed, and a legacy of love was born that would never be forgotten.